We got some good, juicy stuff for you, Broncos fans. Welcome into the Broncos Breakdown by Chat Sports. My name is Moose. On today's episode, leaked, the Denver Broncos are making calls for the NFL trade deadline on a wide receiver. And I'll bet you didn't know this because it's kind of been under the radar until most recently. And I've been gathering intel myself to try to make sure that I give you guys the most accurate report surrounding the Denver Broncos trades. And here's what Adam Schefter came out with this morning. He released a brand new episode of Trade Intel by a bunch of teams. And by the way, the trade deadline is 1 week from today, and we will be live. He also listed the Broncos very early on in this report. 3 other teams, actually just 2 other teams, believe it or not, listed as making calls on wide receivers. And before we get into that, like I said, we will be live for the trade deadline next Tuesday. So remember, if you want to join our watch party for the NFL trade deadline, if something big happens around the Broncos, you got to hit subscribe, and you got to hit that bell notification, select the all option. So here's what Adam Schefter said this morning. I believe it was on Pat McAfee that he kind of released all of this information. We had a report last week that indicated the Denver Broncos could be the biggest contender for a wide receiver at the trade deadline. The Broncos, Bills, and Steelers have all made calls about wide receivers. I mentioned in the previous rumor that it would make sense for the Broncos to look for a more reliable and established number 2 wide receiver behind veteran Courtland Sutton. I've been trying to tell y'all, I got so much negativity in the comment section. These are all just rumors. Trace is making this up. Moose is making this up. No, I'm not. I don't just pull this stuff out of my ass. That is sloppy hosting. When I get a rumor, when I get a little bit of intel, I make an episode for you guys. And now it's coming out that George Paton, Sean Payton, they've been saying the exact same thing that I have. The Broncos need another wide receiver. They need another weapon if they're going to go out and be serious about Super Bowl contenders. And this is the reason why. You've got Courtland Sutton, and then you've got Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin, who are good, but neither one of them has really established themselves as a true number 2 wide receiver. Pat Bryant's getting really, really good. There's been a lot of praise about him in the NFL media recently, especially after the Cowboys game. But it's really apparent that Mims and Franklin, while they are right on the cusp, they're not quite there yet. So it would make sense to go out and get one more major weapon. And here's the rest of what the episode entailed, because it was a podcast that he did. So he didn't give like bulleted rumors. You had to listen to 40 minutes of Adam Schefter talking. Here is what the spark notes of it were. I took care of you guys, made a nice little bullet list for you. The Steelers, Bills, and Broncos have all called about trading for a wide receiver. The Saints are expected to either trade Chris Olave or Raheed Shaheed, the latter being more likely, so most likely Raheed Shaheed getting the boot. The Patriots are expected to trade Kyle Duggar. The Dolphins expected to trade an edge rusher, and the Vikings expected to trade for a veteran quarterback. CBS Sports, by the way, it's not just Adam Schefter from ESPN, was also saying the exact same thing about the Denver Broncos. There's a reporter out there named Jonathan Jones who said this in his most recent weekly CBS report. I put together some trade intel on Monday, but wanted to add a few things to it that I've learned in the coming days since. Perhaps the biggest contender for a wide receiver is not the Steelers, but instead the Denver Broncos. Courtland Sutton is 30 years old. We know this. Denver has all of its picks through the 5th round and got that 4th from the Saints. Here's some more interesting information for you. The Pittsburgh Steelers just signed Marquez Valdez-Scantling. So Bills and Broncos are the only 2 making calls about wide receivers. That doesn't necessarily mean to me that there are no other wide receiver calls being made, but that the most aggressive ones are from the Bills and the Broncos. So before we get into the trade targets and the trade candidates for the Denver Broncos at wide receiver, you let me know in the comment section down below. I want to see as many responses to this question as possible. It will be the pinned comment on today's show. Who should the Denver Broncos trade for? I'm going to also save my answer for later on in the episode. And like I said, coming up, the Denver Broncos trade candidates. 5 players that the Denver Broncos could be eyeing based off of these Adam Schefter reports, CBS reports, and just the overall buzz surrounding the NFL trade deadline. As I get closer and closer to 30 years old, I find that my collagen levels are starting to fall. And while I don't look old, I don't look like I used to in my 20s. And that's where Bubs Naturals comes in. Look, I'm not going to lie to you. When I go to the gym, I get stiffer joints in the morning, recovering from that. My hair has definitely started to thin a little bit. My nails start to break. Aging seems to suck, but it does not have to. Starting in your mid-20s, did you know collagen production starts to naturally decline? That's where Bubs Naturals collagen peptides comes in. Bubs helps restore collagen levels closer to what your body naturally had in its youth. So your joints feel stronger, your hair and nails grow healthier, and your skin, it just looks smoother. There's zero junk, zero sugars, zero sweeteners or fillers. It's also third-party tested, NSF certified for sport and Whole30 approved, so you know it's clean and trustworthy. Live better longer. You know, for a limited time only, our listeners are getting 20% off at Bubs Naturals by using code CHAT at checkout. Just head to bubsnaturals.com and use code CHAT and you are all set. After you purchase, they're going to say, hey, where'd you hear about Bubs Naturals? Tell them that guy Moose from the Broncos Breakdown sent you. One more time, 20% off at Bubs Naturals by using code CHAT at checkout. All of that in the comments and description of today's video. Is George Paton willing to give up the farm? That's the major question that you have to ask yourself, because in reality, you are only going to really add a player of significant value if you're willing to give up draft compensation, especially to teams like the Saints, especially to teams like the Dolphins, who you will see in this report, and all of the lower-level teams in the NFL. Now, George Paton is a master negotiator. Remember, he swindled Mickey Loomis out of that 4th-round pick for Devon Vele. But let's just jump into the wide receiver trade targets that we know are on the market. We'll double the first 2 up because they play for the same team. Chris Olave and Raheed Shaheed. I think you guys know where I stand on the Chris Olave train, but we'll go over his numbers just in case, because while I do believe he would make an unbelievable addition to the Denver Broncos at Mile High, there have been a lot of recent reports that have indicated the Saints are desperately trying to work out a long-term extension with him. So, according to Adam Schefter, still open for a trade, but most likely willing to trade Raheed Shaheed. Or as Trace Gerard likes to say, our Saints host, Raheed, the need for speed, Shaheed. And look, he's been awesome this year. Despite, oh yeah, you're right, I'm sorry, excuse me, Chris Olave. Chris Olave has been excellent this year. Despite terrible performances from the New Orleans Saints. They are 1-7. They're going to just accumulate. So why not get Chris Olave? Well, if the Saints are hell-bent on making sure that he stays a Saint, that's fine. You could go after his counterpart. That's Raheed Shaheed. And again, another player that I think is so underrated. When you talk about the really explosive number 2 wide receivers in the league, his name doesn't come up that often. But what you get from this guy is a true burner over the middle of the field and up the sideline. This is a certified deep threat wide receiver. And the pros and cons absolutely outweigh pro over con significantly. The certified deep threat, the blazing speed, the end zone finder. I mean, the guy just has a knack for scoring. He's not going to be a player, in my opinion, that gets 9 receptions a game. That's not his game. But what he could get you is 5 receptions for 125 yards and 2 touchdowns on any given Sunday. Now, he's not the deepest route runner. He doesn't have the route tree that a guy like Troy Franklin has, but I think that's a good thing. Because right now, the one thing the Denver Broncos are lacking is that true deep threat. Marvin Mims is more of a screen player. He can go deep, but Raheed Shaheed is that guy, the guy that just blazes you over the top. He did have a 2024 injury that kind of sidelined him for the entirety of the year, or almost the entirety of the year, and I don't think in New Orleans he's been utilized properly. Maybe that's because of Spencer Rattler's poor performance. Maybe that's because the Saints just stink overall. Either way, I don't think they use him quite the right way. But again, Courtland Sutton, who's your deepest route runner, Marvin Mims Jr., who is a line of scrimmage player, Troy Franklin, who's got that incredible bag when it comes to running his routes, and Pat Bryant, who is just starting to come into his own. If you added even Raheed Shaheed to this wide receiver depth chart, it moves mountains. It really does. And I have said multiple times on this show that the Broncos need another big-time playmaker. And you guys know where I stand when it comes to Chris Olave. I think the combo of Olave and Sutton would feed families. It is such a perfect pairing. Courtland Sutton can focus on the contested catches. He could focus on the bigger splash plays, whereas Chris Olave could be your, 9 reception, 65-yard player. The drive extender is what I like to call Chris Olave. But again, Chris Olave or Raheed Shaheed, either one would fit the Denver Broncos, there's no doubt. Here's the biggest name on the list for you, A.J. Brown. And I know what you're thinking. Where on earth are you drawing this A.J. Brown number for? Well, there is a Knicks, that's right, New York Knicks, as in the basketball organization. There's a reporter named Chris Persanian who, let's be honest, primarily focuses on basketball. But he does have connections with the New York Giants. And he does have some other connections in the NFL. In fact, some NFL hosts here at Chat Sports know Chris and have texted with Chris in the last couple of days. And he claims the Bills, the Broncos, and the Steelers are at the top of the list of suitors for an A.J. Brown trade if he were available. Now, the Eagles have made it known that they're not willing to trade A.J. Brown, but then Adam Schefter comes back out and says, well, that might not be exactly true. They don't want to trade A.J. Brown, but they would listen to trade talks, meaning if the Denver Broncos are calling, I'm sure Howie Roseman is probably listening. And it's no secret that the Eagles are not using A.J. Brown effectively this year. Now, you could claim that that's because of Kevin Patullo, their offensive coordinator. You could claim that there's too many mouths to feed. You could claim that there have been, a lot of locker room issues. Whatever the reason is, A.J. Brown is not getting the due diligence that he's used to. Now, that part of that is probably an A.J. Brown issue, but I think the pairing is no longer great. I think he wants out of Philly. I think Philly wants to get rid of him. I think the distraction just needs to be over. And I also think that if you made this move, you are an instant Super Bowl favorite. Could you imagine Courtland Sutton and A.J. Brown on either side? I mean, it just goes ballistic. It goes ballistic. And he also would not want to play for a team that can't get him the targets that he so rightly deserves. Bo would feed him a lot, and he would. So let me ask you this question. Should the Broncos trade for A.J. Brown? Give me a yes or give me a no down in the comment section down below. Obviously, this is my favorite choice. I think it is probably one that doesn't likely happen based off of that contract that he's got in Philly and based off of Howie Roseman's reluctancy to want to trade A.J. Brown, but anything could happen. Let's go with 4 and 5, respectively. And Producer Reed, we will also combo these two together as well. And the reason I say that is because we're going to do a little side-by-side comparison. It's Jaylen Waddle and Jakobi Meyers of the Las Vegas Raiders. Up, Moose, timeout. You can't seriously believe the Raiders would trade him in division. Well, believe it or not, that might not be the case. But let's focus on Waddle for a second. Obviously, Waddle is the more talented out of the two, and again, would be like that Chris Olave feeding families type wide receiver. But another player that, with the Dolphins' struggles has not been utilized nearly as well as he could have. Tyreek Hill looks like that he is, not only just done for the season, but who knows if he's going to play football again, let alone for the Miami Dolphins. Jaylen Waddle seems to be the one bright spot of that offense besides Devon Achane. And I truly believe that he's open for business. I do think that the Dolphins would end up moving Jaylen Waddle if the Broncos gave them the right price. But then Jakobi Meyers is another player that has been rumored as the Raiders are kind of actively shopping him. They've taken calls, and this is going back weeks ago that they've been taking calls on him. And I know what you're thinking. There's no way the Raiders would trade to the Broncos in division. They hate each other. Again, stick around. That might not be the case. Jaylen Waddle and Jakobi Meyers, it's very similar numbers in the sense of like both are more talented than what their production is giving you. Waddle is obviously the more talented player. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. So who would I rather have? Obviously, Jaylen Waddle. But I was talking with Mitchell Renz, our Raiders Report host, and he claims that Brian Stark, the assistant GM for the Las Vegas Raiders, you may remember him, spent 13 years with the Denver Broncos, still has that Denver connection. So you may have seen that phone call between George Paton and Brian Stark, like, hey, just spitballing here. What would it take to get a guy like Jakobi Meyers? And I'm not so sure that with how bad the Raiders are, that they're not willing to at least listen, even if it means trading it to a division rival. If you were to offer a third-round pick for Jakobi Meyers, I think they would salivate at that offer. They really, really would. And again, you can kind of supplant that third-round pick if you gave it up because you got an extra fourth from the Saints in the Devon Vele trade. So 2 fourths kind of equal 1/3. I'd rather have Waddle, but Jakobi Meyers is still a really, really good second option. I would not be upset at any of these moves. Not one. I do think the Broncos need another wide receiver. The drops have been an issue, and clearly adding that one little extra piece would take this team from Super Bowl contenders to Super Bowl favorites, specifically with A.J. Brown. But any of these players would help those causes and those odds. And like I said, we're going to be live next Tuesday, a week from today. We'll be right here on the Broncos Breakdown. I'll be in my Broncos garb. We'll be ready to go to see if the Denver Broncos make a move. That's going to do it for us on today's episode. A reminder to hit that subscribe button, like today's video. Mile high salutes. Be cool.